I gave a ride to a sad old woman I found in the rain. She left her purse in my car. Inside wasn't a wallet. It was a set of keys and a letter from my late grandmother. On a miserable rainy day, I offered a ride to a sad old woman I found at a bus stop. She left her purse in my car, but inside there was no wallet. There was just a single old-fashioned house key and a sealed letter in my late grandmother's handwriting. Before we get into it, I'd love to know what city are you watching from today, and be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Let's head out into the rain. Grief has a geography for the past year since my grandmother Clara had passed. My world had shrunk to the cramped and often damp landscape of my small 2-bedroom apartment. It was a world of overdue bills of second-hand furniture, of the constant low grade of anxiety that comes from being a single mother, just barely keeping her head above water. The place my grief truly lived was a ghost. It was my grandmother's house, a beautiful old Victorian with a sprawling garden she had poured her heart and soul into. It was the house where I had spent every summer of my childhood, the only place I had ever truly felt at home. It was gone. I remember the day, a week after her funeral, with a clarity that was a physical pain. My mother's brother David had sat me down at his own perfect mahogany dining table. He had a look on his face of practiced sorrowful concern. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." He had been done, sliding a small, thin envelope across the table towards me. "I've gone through all of Clara's finances. It's not good. She had a second mortgage. I didn't know about a mountain of debt. After paying off the creditors, he had sighed perfect performance of a man burdened by responsibility. I had to sell the house. This, he had tapped the thin envelope, is all that's left." I had been too numb with my own grief to question him. I had just taken the check that insulting pittance. I had accepted his story. I had accepted that the one last beautiful piece of my own history was gone, sold to strangers to pay for the secret failures of the woman I had loved most in the world. On this particular Tuesday, a year later, the rain was coming down in sheets, a miserable gray curtain that perfectly matched my own mood. I was driving home from my job as a waitress, my old beat-up car sputtering in protest. I was tired. I was broke, and I was on my way to pick up my son from a daycare I could barely afford. As I was stopped at a red light, that I saw her. She was an elderly woman standing at a bus stop with no shelter, the rain plastering her thin gray hair to her head. She was struggling with 2 large paper grocery bags that were rapidly dissolving in the downpour. She looked frail and dignified and utterly completely soaked. My first selfish and deeply tired instinct was to just keep driving. I was late. My car was a mess. It was not my problem. But then I looked at her face. Quiet, uncomplaining, resolve in her tired eyes. I saw a reflection of my own grandmother, a woman who had faced the world with a quiet and unshakable grace, with a sigh of resignation at my own conscience. I pulled my car over to the curb right in front of her. I rolled down the passenger window. "Ma'am, you can't stand out here. You'll catch your death. Please, let me give you a ride." I watched her for a moment, the rain pouring down a single solitary figure in a vast indifferent storm. The warmth of the good deed was a small, fragile amber in my chest, feeling that was quickly being extinguished by the cold, hard reality of my own empty wallet and my still overdue rent as I looked out at the rain-slicked street, at the row of small, run-down houses that made up my neighborhood. I had no idea that the small, simple act of kindness I had just performed an act I had already dismissed as a pointless, sentimental gesture was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new one. It was about to lead me in the most unbelievable and miraculous way. Right back to the front door of the home I thought I had lost forever. The old woman, her face a mixture of surprise and a deep, weary gratitude, finally relented. "Well," she said, her voice, a crisp, elegant thing that was at odds with her drenched appearance, "if you're quite sure, it's no trouble." "None at all." I lied, my mind already calculating the extra time it would take the fuel I couldn't really afford to waste. I helped her and herd dissolving grocery bags into the passenger seat of my old rattling car, the interior with my son's car seat in. The back and a collection of his stray toys on the floor suddenly felt shabby and a little embarrassing in her dignified presence. "My name is Evelyn," she said, as I pulled away from the curb and back into the driving rain. "Sarah," I replied. "Pleasure to meet you, Evelyn." The drive to her apartment building was a quiet, comfortable one. The rain hammered a soft, rhythmic beat on the roof of the car. "And we talked, or rather, she asked, and I answered." She had a gentle, probing way about her, a genuine curiosity that made me feel for the first time in a very long time seen. She asked about my son, about my work, about my life. I, a woman who had become so used to keeping my struggles to myself, found myself opening up to this kind elderly stranger. I told her about my grandmother Clara, about the beautiful house with the rose garden that had been my childhood sanctuary. And I told her about the pain of losing it. My uncle David, he handled the estate. I explained the story of familiar dull ache in my own heart. He said she had debts I didn't know about. He said he had to sell the house to pay them off. It all happened so fast. Evelyn just listened, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression, a mask of a quiet and deeply unreadable sympathy. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wonderful woman, and a very shrewd one. It is a tragedy. What happened to her home? There was a strange and almost imperceptible emphasis on the word tragedy that I didn't quite understand. When we arrived at her apartment building, a clean, modest, and well-kept place for seniors, I insisted on helping her carry her groceries to her door. You have a very kind heart, my dear. A very kind heart, just like your grandmother, Clara. The use of my grandmother's name, so familiar and so casual on her lips, sent a small, strange jolt through me. You knew her? I asked, surprised. A sad, nostalgic smile touched her lips. Everyone knew, Clara said, her voice a little distant. She was a force of nature. She then thanked me again, profusely, and disappeared into her apartment, leaving me alone in the quiet, carpeted hallway. It wasn't until I had picked up my son from daycare and had finally arrived back at my own cramped apartment that I saw it sitting on the passenger seat, a small, elegant, and deeply out-of-place object in my messy car. Was her purse? An antique-looking, dark blue velvet clutch. She had left it behind. My first thought was a weary sigh. It was on the other side of town. It would have to wait until tomorrow. But I knew the woman would be worried. I decided to open it, hoping to find an ID card or a phone number, so I could at least call and let her know it was safe. I unclasped the small silver latch inside of the purse was lined with a soft, faded silk. It was almost completely empty. There was no wallet, no phone, no identification. There was only a single heavy, old-fashioned brass key, the kind that opens a very old and very solid door, and lying beside it was a thick cream-colored and formally sealed envelope. My breath caught in my throat. It was not addressed to Evelyn. It was addressed to me, to Sarah, and the handwriting, the beautiful, familiar, and elegant cursive script was a ghost. It was the unmistakable handwriting of my late grandmother, Clara. I stared at the envelope, my heart, a frantic wild drum in my chest. It was impossible. My grandmother had been gone for over a year. This letter could not exist. And yet, here it was. I looked at the familiar, beautiful script, my own name written by a hand that was now just a memory. My own hands shaking so badly. I could barely function, carefully broke the wax seal. I had no idea. I was not just opening a letter. I was opening a time capsule, a secret, and the one last brilliant and deeply loving gift my grandmother had left for me from beyond the grave. This could not be real. And yet it was with a heart that was a frantic, chaotic drum in my chest. Carefully broke the wax seal, a seal that had been waiting patiently over a year to be opened. I unfolded the heavy riddle paper and I began to read. My dearest, Sarah. The letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone. The world is a little less bright without you in it for me, but you are not gone. My brave and wonderful and deeply underestimated granddaughter are the entire reason for this letter. I am writing this to you as a warning, as a gift. And, as a final secret plan, I had to pause my own eyes, blurring with a fresh wave of grief and love. I know your heart. I know the heart of my own son, your Uncle David. He is a good man, I believe. He is a weak man, a man who has his entire life been seduced by the easy promises of money. And I fear with a mother's certainty that after I am gone, his weakness and his greed will cause him to do a great and terrible injustice to you. My own blood ran cold. It was as if she were in the room with me, narrating the exact painful events of the past year. She wrote, and the words on the page were a perfect, brutal echo of my uncle's own lies. He will tell you that I was in debt. He will tell you that he was forced to sell my house, our beautiful home, pay off my creditors. He will give you a small insulting check, and he will tell you with a sad, performative sigh that it is all that is left. This, my dear Sarah, is a lie. A single hot tear of a new and righteous anger dropped onto the page. I have no debts, the letter continued, her words, a quiet, powerful declaration of truth. My home is paid for free and clear, and it is the most valuable and most beloved asset I own. I cannot and will not leave it to him. He would sell it in a heartbeat and squander the money on some foolish, flashy thing. I cannot leave it directly to you, my darling. Because I know him, I know he would find a way to manipulate you to guilt you into giving him control, into selling it for his own selfish ends. And so she wrote, I have done something unconventional, final secret. I hope very wise move on the great chessboard of our family. I have left my home in a legally ironclad and completely secret transfer of deed to the one single person in this entire world. I trust as much as I trust you, my oldest, my dearest, and my most loyal friend, Evelyn, the kind, elegant, and rain-soaked old woman from the bus stop. I have given my dear Evelyn one final and very important instruction. She was to find a way to meet you, not as my friend, but as a stranger. She was to see the woman you have become, to test your character, to see if the kind, compassionate, and good-hearted girl I raised survived the many hardships of this world. And if she found that you were still that girl, if you proved yourself to be a woman of true and decent character, she was to give you this letter, and she was to give you this key. I looked down at the heavy old-fashioned brass key that had fallen from the envelope onto my lap. The key to a house I thought had been lost forever, sold to strangers. The woman in the rain, the kind conversation, her strange knowing looks. It had not been a coincidence. It had been a test, a quiet, beautiful, and deeply straying test of my own character. A test orchestrated by my brilliant and wonderful grandmother from beyond the grave. My Uncle David had not just mismanaged an estate. He was a liar, a fraud. He had for the last year been actively and maliciously trying to steal my own true inheritance. The grief I had felt for my lost home. The home I had mourned for a year was gone, replaced by a new, cold, and deeply satisfying fury. My grandmother had not just left me a house. She had left me a mission. She had left me a partner in her old and loyal friend Evelyn. And she had left me a final, quiet, and deeply consequential battle to fight. My uncle's lie was a dark, ugly shadow that had been hanging over my life for the past year. It was time I decided, my fingers closing around the cold, hard brass of the key, to finally and completely let the sun in. My first act was not one of rage. It was one of reclamation. Took the key. I got in my old beat-up car, and I drove across town to the quiet, tree-lined street I had avoided for a year because the pain of seeing it, of knowing it was lost, had been too great. Parked my car across the street. I looked. The house stood exactly as I remembered it. A beautiful, proud, and slightly overgrown Victorian, a silent testament to my grandmother's love. The rose bushes she had so painstakingly tended were a little wild now, but they were still there. The old familiar porch swing was still hanging, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. It was a time capsule, my time capsule, with a heart that was a frantic, joyful, and terrified drum in my chest. I walked up the stone pathway. I slid the old heavy brass key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying familiar click, and I pushed the door open. Air inside was still and cool. It smelled impossibly of her, of lavender and old books and the faint sweet scent of apple pies. She was always baking. I walked through the silent dust sheet-covered rooms. A ghost in my own past. I ran my hand along her favorite armchair. I stood in the sunlit kitchen where I had learned to bake, and I wept, not tears of sadness, but tears of a profound and deeply moving homecoming. I was standing in the middle of her living room, my grandmother's living room, my living room, when I finally made the call, got my phone, and I dialed his number. My uncle, David. He answered on the second ring, his voice, the familiar, slightly impatient and condescending tone he always used with me, Sarah. He said, "What is it?" "I'm in the middle of a meeting." "I'm sure you are," I said, my own voice, a calm, quiet, and dangerous instrument that he did not recognize. "I just had a quick question for you, David, about Grandma Clara's house." I could hear the impatient sigh on the other end of the line. "Sarah, we have been over this a dozen times. The house was sold to pay off her debts. It's gone. It is a very sad but closed chapter. You need to learn to move on." "That's funny," I said, a slow, cold, and deeply satisfying smile spreading across my face. As I looked around the beautiful sunlit room I was standing in, and I have to say, a house that was sold a year ago, it looks to be in remarkably good condition. The silence on the other end of the line was a thing of pure, exquisite beauty. It was a silence filled with the sound of a liar's mind, a rat in a maze, frantically trying to find an escape that did not exist. "What are you talking about? How did you get in there?" "That's breaking and entering?" "No, it's not," I said, my voice as calm and as clear as a bell. "It's called using a key that was given to me by the legal owner of the property." I let the words hang in the air. "You lied to me, David. There were no debts. The house was never sold. My grandmother was just as you have always known, a much smarter and far more decent person than you are. She left it to someone she could trust. Who has it? A lovely woman named Evelyn, Grandma's oldest and dearest friend. A woman who, as it turns out, has a very kind heart." I walked over to the front window and looked out at the street. "I have to go now, David. I'm meeting with the actual owner, Evelyn, and our lawyer here in about 10 minutes to have the deed formally and finally signed over to me as per my grandmother's very specific and very clear final wishes." I paused, a final beautiful thought occurring to me. "I am sure," I added, "that you will be hearing from my lawyer in the morning. I believe there is a small legal matter of the inheritance you stole from me to discuss." I hung up the phone, and the silence in my grandmother's living room was absolute. The ghost of my Uncle David's panicked, sputtering voice seemed to hang in the air for a moment before dissolving into the quiet, sunlit peace of the house. The lie was dead. I was, for the very first time in a long and very difficult year, finally home. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Evelyn, the kind, elegant woman from the bus stop. My grandmother's secret keeper. She walked into the house, not as a stranger, but as a CEO conspirator friend. She was holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Your grandmother," she said, her eyes twinkling with a fierce and deeply satisfied light, always did love a good executed plan. I believe she would agree that this calls for a celebration. We sat together on my grandmother's old comfortable sofa, the same sofa, where I had spent so many afternoons as a child listening to her stories. And Evelyn told me the rest of the story. She told me of her 60-year friendship with my grandmother Clara, a bond forged in a world that was often unkind to strong, intelligent women. She told me of my grandmother's deep and abiding love for me and of her growing profound disappointment in her own son's weakness and greed. She saw this day coming. Evelyn said, her voice a soft, nostalgic murmur. She knew that David would see you as an obstacle, not as family. And she was determined, absolutely determined to protect you and to protect this house, her legacy from his worst impulses. She then handed me a thick, formal-looking folder she had brought with her. Inside were all the legal documents, the signed deed, final instructions. My grandmother had not just left me a house. She had left me a fortress, a legal and financial fortress so strong that my uncle's pathetic attempts to fight it would be useless. The fallout was as expected, swift and pathetic. My Uncle David did try to fight. He called his own lawyers. He made threats. He accused me and Evelyn of conspiracy exerting undue influence on a senile old woman. But his blustering was no match for the quiet, ironclad precision of my grandmother's final plan. He was not just legally outmaneuvered. He was financially ruined. The small inheritance he had so cruelly stolen from me was nothing compared to the legal fees he now faced. In the end, he was forced to retreat, a defeated man. His greed having cost him not just a fortune, but the last lingering shred of his own family's respect. My vindication, however, was not in his ruin. It was in my own quiet and beautiful rebuilding. The story ends on a sunny Saturday afternoon. 3 months later, I am not in my old, cramped, and damp apartment. I am here in my grandmother's garden, a place I had thought was lost to me forever. The rose bushes under my own loving care are thriving again. Their bright, fragrant blossoms estimate to a life that refuses to be forgotten. My son is laughing, chasing a butterfly across the green sun-drenched lawn. And I am not alone. Sitting with me on the familiar old porch swing is Evelyn. She has become more than a friend, more than a CO conspirator. She has become my family. My grandmother, in her infinite wisdom, had not just left me a house. She had left me a new grandmother, a new guardian, final, beautiful, and deeply cherished link to her own love. We are drinking iced tea. We are talking about the future, about the new paint colors for the kitchen, about which vegetables we should plant in the garden next spring, about the simple, beautiful, and profoundly ordinary business of building a new and better life. I had walked into a storm, a lost, grieving, and struggling young woman. But a simple, selfless act of kindness for a stranger had led me home. My grandmother had not just given me a key to a house. She had given me the key to my own future. I was finally and truly ready to unlock the door, an absolutely beautiful and heartwarming story about a grandmother's brilliant posthumous plan and a granddaughter's quiet strength. What do you think of the grandmother's incredible foresight and her secret test? Let us know in the comments below. If you are moved by this story of a family's legacy being protected, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.